Welcome to the Macdownunder Podcast for all Australian Apple computer enthusiasts and collectors.
Hi, welcome to the Macdownunder Podcast, episode number 41. I'm Justin, and thanks for joining me today. And coming back because I noticed last week not too many people were interested in Apple's other wired networks. But if, like me, you'd never heard about Apple's school bus, or Apple's implementation of Token Ring called Token Talk, or Apple's use of TwinX to talk to IBM mainframes, maybe go back and have a look at last week's episode after you see today's, because there's some really interesting stuff there. Now, in the last week or so, I've actually received some new equipment, and I just thought one of them is a bit relevant. So the first one that's just arrived a bit late, unfortunately, for the episode, is the Apple Data Modem 2400, which I spoke about. Looks very much like the fax modem, but as you can see on the label at the front, it's the data modem. The rear is pretty much the same as the fax modem, with the phone in and out, with the pass-through ports that we spoke about last week for serial bus, the power support, and the on-off switch. So that arrived during the week. And the other one that arrived during the week goes back quite a few episodes, and it's this Apple IIe numeric keypad. Now, the one that I had on the show is virtually the same, but it came with the cream cable. This is the slightly earlier model with the black cable, which was similar to the one that came with the Apple II or II Plus. So two new additions to the collection, and hopefully that'll go up on the website soon. So today, I'm going to look at Apple's early implementation of wireless networking. We'll also cover our regular collecting news, coming events in Australia, and some recent for sale finds related to today's topic. So, on to today's episode. So, in March 1993, Apple released the Power CD. Now, we've spoken about the Power CD before under storage devices. However, the reason I'm bringing up today, it's the first device that Apple implemented that had an IR receiver right here. And this amazing remote control. Now, I know there's some debate about whether Philips developed it or NEC developed it. Kodak was involved somewhere along the line as well as Apple. Either way, this one's an Apple badge product, and this is a pretty incredible infrared remote. So, wireless technology. One way, admittedly. Now, later that same year, Apple introduced the Macintosh TV with the IR port at the very top. And it came out with a completely different remote. Nice credit card size, easy to lose, I've got to say. I had to dig down deep to find it today for today's episode. But it was the second infrared device that Apple put out, the Macintosh TV with its remote control. In 1994, Apple released a series of Apple TV tuner cards for the Performer series and some of the others, and it came with its own remote, again infrared controlled, and lasted pretty much right through to the beige G3 towers, where you could still use a version of the TV tuner card. Fast forward to 2005, and the iMac G5 came out with, again, an infrared receiver and this infrared remote control, which Apple started using for a whole range of things. But largely, the big sales pitch was for Front Row, the software that came with the iMac that allowed you to control your multimedia from a remote control, from your lounge suite in the lounge room. But it was also used for a whole range of other things, the iPod Hi-Fi, the iPod Dock, the first generation Apple TV, and a whole range of other things that I've probably forgotten. It was replaced in 2009 with the aluminium version, pretty much the same controls, but in an aluminium case. In fact, it came out alongside the first Magic Mouse. And again, it's the infrared control with a range of buttons, again to operate Front Row, but also introduced with the Apple TV as well. Now, the last infrared remote control Mac was the iMac Mini 2014 model, which was discontinued in 2018. And this aluminium remote was quietly discontinued in 2022. So Apple had a lot of infrared remote controls from as early back as 1993. But of course, these are all one-way devices, which is not really networking, but I thought I'd cover them off. In fact, we might do a future episode going into the functions of all these remotes because there are so many. Now, in May 1992, Apple announced the Newton. Not actually released until August 1993, however, it did include an infrared port. And this was the first time you actually could communicate with other devices using the infrared port. Now, it used the amplitude shift keying method developed by Sharp, so Sharp ASK, and it operated at a speed of 9600 bits per second. It was developed by Sharp for its PDAs and notebooks, and reportedly only really worked over about 1 metre. In 1994, Apple released the MessagePad 110. Now, it also comes with an infrared port, as did in fact all of the Newtons, but this one increased the speed of the Sharp ASK protocol to 38.4 kilobits per second, but maintained backwards compatibility with the original MessagePad and the MessagePad 100. So these ports basically allowed you to beam between them. You needed to line them up within about 30 degrees, minimum distance, so less than 1 metre largely for the MessagePads. And then you'd need to implement the send and receive protocols on each device. Now, this allowed you to beam information between the two devices, things like contact cards, diary appointments, and so forth. Now, sadly, I got my MessagePad 110 in 1996, and I didn't know anyone else with a MessagePad, so I didn't get to use it terribly much until I started my collection. So let's have a look at the list of Apple devices that used the Sharp ASK protocol. So the original MessagePad and the MessagePad 100 both used the 9600 BPS version, and those that are italicized, the MessagePad 110, 120 and 130 all used the 38.4 kilobit per second version. Now, in August 1995, Apple released the PowerBook 190 and the PowerBook 5300. They were the first Apple laptops to include infrared. So again, if we have a look at the back of this PowerBook 190, we'll see there's a fairly large infrared port. Now, they didn't use the Sharp ASK protocol. In fact, what Apple had done is introduce their own version of Apple Talk over infrared called IR Talk. And interestingly enough, it ran at exactly the same speed as local talk over wire, which was 230.4 bits per second. So quite a bit faster than the ASK protocol from Sharp, which is probably why they used it, but completely compatible with the Apple Talk networking, provided you had laptops that used the Apple Talk IR. Now, according to some websites, this version of the infrared connectivity could be used for up to 5 meters. Now, I don't know that I've ever seen it work over 5 meters, but there are some websites claiming that you can, again, with a clear line of sight and within a 30-degree angle of the infrared port. Now, IR Talk, of course, could only do those things that Apple Talk originally did. So file exchange and messaging and sending messages to printers, for example. So that adds the PowerBook 190, the PowerBook 3400, and also the PowerBook 1400 that all used Apple's IR Talk for wireless communication. Now, in 1997, Apple released a suite of products with upgraded infrared technology. So the PowerBook 2400, the PowerBook 3400, the MessagePad 2000, and the new product, the Apple eMate, based on Newton technology. Now, all of these included infrared ports. So here's the one on the back of the PowerBook 2400. Here's the one on the back of the MessagePad 2000. And here's the one on the back of the eMate 300. Now, all of these were upgraded to include the Infrared Data Association standard, the IRDA, which was developed back in 1993 by a consortium of up to 50 companies. The main difference is this no longer worked at the local talk speed of 230.4 kilobits per second. This operated at 4 megabits per second, so a considerable improvement. It also allowed for the transfer of TCP/IP packets, so you could run the internet over infrared if you really wanted to. They also allowed for file exchange and other general internet and network connectivity. Now, in the case of the PowerBooks, they were backward compatible to IR Talk, so you could still use these laptops with the earlier versions that only had Apple Talk's IR Talk. In the case of the Newton and the eMate, these could still beam backwards to the ASK protocol that was used by the message pads. So let's take a look at where we are. So we've got the Sharp ASK protocol on the left that we covered earlier. We've got the Apple IR Talk on the right-hand side that we covered earlier. So now down in the middle column, we have all those devices that can talk IRDA. So the Message Pad 2000, 2100 and the eMate 300, and they're in green because they can also talk in the Sharp ASK protocol. And then in the PowerBook range, we've got the PowerBook 2400, the PowerBook 3400, the PowerBook G3, that's the Kenga version, as well as the Wall Street and the Pretty Damn Quick version of the PowerBook G3, all capable of IRDA, but also backward compatible to Apple's IR Talk. So in 1998, Apple released the Bondi iMac. Now, both revisions A and B included infrared port over here. It was IRDA compatible, but unfortunately, Apple took the decision at that time to drop support for both the Sharp ASK protocol that the message pad used, but also Apple's own IR Talk that supported the Apple Talk protocol over infrared. So there was no backward compatibility. So let's take a look at the list. So again, on the left, we've got all of those message pads that supported the Sharp ASK protocol only. And on the right, we've got all of those PowerBooks that supported the Apple Talk IR Talk only. And down the middle, we've got all of those with IRDA. But let's focus on the three at the bottom. So the Bondi iMac revision A and B only supported IRDA and wasn't backward compatible. The Lombard and Pismo PowerBooks G3 and the original titanium and gigabit Ethernet versions of the PowerBook G4 also supported IRDA. So the last Apple device that supported infrared networking at all was this one, the gigabit Ethernet version of the G4 iMac. And there's the IR port to show you on the back. It was discontinued in April 2002. The last Mac operating system to support infrared networking appears to have been OS 10.4 Tiger. Apple never released any infrared compatible peripherals. There was no add-on infrared transmitters for devices that didn't come with it built in, like the Quadras, the Power Macs and the iBooks. There were third parties and they still make them. There were no IR compatible printers that Apple made or distributed. However, Hewlett-Packard definitely made some, and of course Apple rebadged some of the Hewlett-Packard products, but none of those that contained infrared or IRDA compatibility. From what I've read, it looked like Apple originally had big ideas for IR networking. The idea being meeting rooms full of people with Newtons beaming contact information and diary dates between themselves. Having a boardroom desk full of laptops beaming files and messages to each other, or school tables full of eMates doing much the same thing. These you can see in the literature of the day, but sadly never came to pass. So what were the downsides to infrared networking? Some of them are pretty obvious. The environmental conditions. Your minimum distance, you needed a clear line of sight, and you needed to be within 30 degrees of centre for it to work. And even then, it was a bit tricky. And of course, all we really saw was one-to-one communication. Apple certainly hadn't worked out how to do multicast infrared networking. And then there's the security. There's no security on that infrared protocols at all. In fact, I understand in contemporary IT circles, infrared is pretty much banned to ensure good security. Data speed, of course, maxed out at 4 megabits per second. So the same PowerBook 3400 that introduced 4 megabit IRDA infrared networking had a 10 megabit per second Ethernet port in it as well. So Ethernet was just faster, but you needed a cable. And of course, after all, Wi-Fi was on the horizon and was going to take over all of this. So have you got any of these Apple infrared networking devices in your collection? Which ones do you have? Do you still use them or test them out occasionally? Which one's your favourite? I reckon mine's beaming on the Newton. Let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. So on to the news. Only one item this week, but it's a pretty big one. So over on the 68K Macintosh Liberation Army and also the Tinker Different forums, Alex the Cat 123, well known in the Lisa community, has announced that he's made a single board Lisa computer using FPGA technology. It's got all the ports that the Lisa has, plus HDMI and USB, and allows you to run all the Lisa operating systems that the Lisa could run, including Gem OS. Links down in the description if you want to take a look. Coming events. And first up, the technology markets. Now, they held a market last Sunday with really short notice. I didn't even get to talk about it in the last week's program. But there's now no updates for future. So links down in the description. Watch the website if you want to get down there. The next WasFest meeting in New South Wales for the Apple II community is on the 23rd of May. Again, this is run in a private home, so contact the organisers to get details. Links down in the description. Retro Gaming Bendigo have their next meeting this coming Saturday, the 9th of May, at 12 o'clock for a 12:30 start. So a few differences here, Saturday and a little bit earlier. And also at the Huntley Memorial Hall, their new venue. Links down in the description. The Mac Museum is holding their next monthly open day this Saturday, the 9th of May, between 10 and 2 p.m. in Somerville, Victoria. Try to get down there. I'll certainly be trying my best to get there. And the Adelaide Retro Computing Group meeting, their next meeting is this Friday, the 8th of May, 5:30 to 10:30 p.m. in the usual place in the Unley Community Centre in South Australia. Now, if you have a retro computing event or gathering, particularly if it involves Apple computers, and you'd like me to promote it on the channel here, please let me know. I'm happy to promote it for you. Okay, so based on today's episode, I've gone looking for any of these devices that might be available for sale in Australia. And first up, we have the original message pad, the H1000, in untested condition with no charger. Parts only. It looks a bit rough in the photos, but it's available in New South Wales for only $100. There's a PowerBook 190 laptop with manuals, disk tools and case, missing the battery, but gee, it looks in good shape, in South Australia for $499.80. Remembering this was one of the first to introduce Apple Talk's IR Talk. Next up, we have a PowerBook G3. This is the PDQ variety, from what I can tell, in working condition in South Australia for $500. Now, next up is a combo, and there's only really one thing in there that we'd be interested in today, but this has got a Power Macintosh, a PowerBook 1400. Now, there's the PowerBook that I'm interested in because it's got IR Talk in it, and printer. Now, the photos are pretty poor, so I'd make contact with the seller, get some better photos and see if you can do a deal. But at the moment, all three are listed for $900 in Victoria. Now, next up, I think we've had this on the show before, but there's an Apple Newton message pad, leather case, fax modem, battery pack, recharger, pretty much all in box with the manuals and everything complete. So it's a pretty good deal. This one's in Canberra, ACT, for $1,000. Next up, we have the PowerBook G3 Kanga, which is in the 3500 style case, but it's a G3, and apparently it's rare. It's certainly working, the photos look fantastic. This one's in Victoria for $1,500. And for those of you on a budget, the next item is the A1294 Apple Remote Control. So this is the silver version, the last version of the infrared remote that Apple made. There are lots of generic ones out there, but if you look at the photos, this one's genuine at $20. What a bargain in Victoria. Well, that brings us to the end of episode 41 of the Macdownunder podcast and our look at Apple's early endeavours into wireless networking using infrared. Please let me know what you thought down in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. So next week, we'll look at Apple's airport for why flying. See what I did there? Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes. And until I see you next time, take care. Thank you for joining the Macdownunder podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you again soon.